Michael, there have been numerous visits by Prime Minister Modi in the past as well. Yes, this is his first state visit. Having said that, there have been previous state visits as well. This is the third state visit by an Indian leader. Why is this state visit being billed as a turning point for India-US relationship?
Well, I think, first of all, there's an expectation that there'll be some deliverables that are unprecedented. I think we've already discussed these. If the GE jet engine deal goes through, it would be the biggest tech transfer defense tech transfer that's ever taken place between the U.S. and India. So that's one thing. Also the fact that there's apparently going to be this deal on drones, that would be a game changer, just because for many years there's been discussions about the possibility of a deal on drones, but it hasn't materialized, and now it looks like it will, which suggests that you are seeing this new phase of partnership. I think it's important to acknowledge that the rhetoric can be a bit heady at times, and it could be a bit just very grandiose. But I think that there's genuine meaning to that, in the sense that it suggests that, yes, there's been exponential growth in the relationship over the last few decades, particularly in terms of security partnership, and especially as each side's rivalries with China have sharpened, giving them a stronger purpose to work together. But in terms of the deliverables, we're just going to see some things come out of this visit that have not happened before. And you could expand the scope broader to look at some of the announcements that will likely be made on higher education. These are just new things, and it's a reflection of a broadening relationship. I don't think the relationship has ever been as broad and multifaceted as it is right now.
Right. Glenn Carl, why do you think this state visit is so significant, perhaps even compared to the previous ones?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry, the connection is not great.
No, I just want to know if you do agree that this state visit by Indian Prime Minister has been significant, and perhaps even draw a comparison of the previous state visits that have been made by the earlier heads of state.
American politicians in particular tend to talk about personal relationships being very important, and I can work with this man, and I know him, and so on. And a lot of that is frankly hooey or naivete on the part of the Americans. Modi and Biden may well love each other for all I know, but that really is not the issue. A state dinner, a state visit, is a very conscious symbol, gesture to show the importance. And the reason for the importance is India defined itself as non-aligned from independence, but non-aligned was a political posture, really. At the same time, India largely was a socialist economy and rejected the international globalization and capitalism and so on as it has evolved. That's no longer true. India is as keen on the normative international economic order and political order as the United States. And it is now a global economic power, and every day more so. So India's and the U.S. interests internationally in that regard are far more in alignment now. It is in India's interest and the United States' interest for the two of the great powers to coordinate their policies. And they do largely align with each other, given their economic objectives. Similarly, on the security angle. So it is a significant moment because it formalizes, pushes yet further the slowly ever closer growing relations between two of the four great powers on Earth, China, U.S., India, and the European Union economically.
Right. Glenn Carl, before I let you go, I want to talk about the conundrum that's posed by the growing relationship between Moscow and Beijing. And as we all know, that ties between India and Russia have not really, taken a hit despite the war in Ukraine. Do you think that China can now use its leverage over Moscow to sort of pressurize India? And can the United States capitalize on this conundrum?
Well, when the United States invaded Iraq 20 years ago now, I made the impolitic observation to my colleagues, because I was working at the time on that issue, that the success of the American military was to extend the Iranian influence from the Iran-Iraq border to at least the Tigris-Euphrates River, doing the exact opposite of what we had sought to do. So, similarly, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has succeeded at the least in turning Moscow into a vassal junior partner of China. The reason for this is happening, of course, is because what other states will these countries turn to? There's China, Myanmar, North Korea, Iran, and Russia, maybe Bulgaria, and that's about it. So China is the behemoth, and Russia needs the lifeline economically, financially, and they would like it militarily, but for the moment they aren't really getting that. So China's influence will be lasting and substantial. Russia has put itself into an international corner, whatever happens in Ukraine.
All right. Many thanks to you, Glenn Carl, for joining in. Michael, if I could, in fact, talk about India's challenge right now, because you've extensively covered South Asia. The fact is that India is trying to become that voice of the global South, as Prime Minister Modi has also called it. The biggest conflict that seems to be plaguing India right now is its non-aligned stance when it comes to countries like Russia, which it is also competing with in a way, because let's not forget that it's not just Russia, it's also China. India has also rejected the BRI. At the same time, India is also part of the BRICS, which also has Russia and China again. So how do you place that conflict into perspective, especially for India, when it comes to the challenge of choosing between a non-aligned stance vis-a-vis, becoming that voice of the global South? Do you think that India will finally have to take a stance?
Well, I think that as great power competition intensifies, as it is, particularly in terms of U.S.-China competition, but also U.S.-Russia competition and rivalry, I think that makes non-aligned countries like India feel the pressure, and it certainly, it does put them under pressure to choose a side. But I would argue that looking at the Russia-Ukraine conflict, India has really come out with flying colors in terms of how it's been able to continue to pursue its strategic autonomy policy, because more than a year after the Russian invasion, I would argue that India's relations with both the U.S. and Russia remain quite good, even though the trajectory of its relations with the U.S., I think, is much more positive and stable than its future trajectory with Russia. It's a bit more uncertain. So I think that's significant for sure. But I think that if there were to be certain trigger events in the war in Ukraine, let's say, absolute worst case scenarios here, if Russia were to expand its war beyond Ukraine into a NATO state like Poland, that would put a lot of pressure on India, I think, to really sort of throw itself closer to the U.S. camp. And my goodness, the absolute worst possible scenario, if there were to be a nuclear war, if Russia were to use nuclear weapons, I think it would be nearly impossible for India to stay non-aligned at that point in the context of how it goes about its relationship with the U.S. And Russia. But so long as the relative status quo continues to play out, I think that India has been very effective. And we should also note that commercially speaking, it's managed to maintain a pretty robust trade relationship with both China and the United States, even despite the tensions in its relations with China. So I think for now it's been able to continue to push out this strategic autonomy policy very effectively, especially because it had a major test in the form of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.